Welcome to everybody from ethics class at St. Leo University. And this is one of my first video efforts, and I'm looking forward to it. I'll be teaching a small part of a class that would normally last just over an hour. The entire material itself could take upwards of 2 classes, and I'll be covering an introduction and part of that in my 10 minutes. My classroom has about 20 students. They are about 19 years old. It is a public school. The students are mixed races, mixed religions, half male, half female. And there's a number of non-religious people in the course as well. My students have received instruction already in political philosophy, in British American democracy, and in the American Constitution. The document we're referring to primarily in today's class is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is one of the founding documents of the United Nations. I would normally show that document on a large projector screen, and I have the capability of highlighting different sections of that document as we discuss it. I would normally be walking around the classroom. I would be taking questions from students, and sometimes that could turn into a discussion of its own. That's not something that I can do here now, but that would normally be part of the dynamic of the class. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was ratified by the United Nations in 1948. Obviously, the organization and this declaration were very much a response of the world to the horrors of the Holocaust and the horrors of World War II and Nazism. I should mention, a lot of people don't know that the chairperson of the committee that produced this document was Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was one of the most powerful and famous women of the 20th century, fairly so. But this document is probably her most brilliant and profound work. And so she is an important person that often gets overlooked in these discussions. The original signatories to this document in 1948 were from North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Australia, not Africa, because at that time there were no African member states of the United Nations. Today, there are 192 signatories of the Declaration of Human Rights. However, I must say that I believe that some of those countries that have signed on to the Declaration are probably cynical about their intention to follow the Declaration. The Declaration, in 72 years, it is considered now the foundational document of human rights law since World War II. This document, the Declaration, has influenced international law, international treaties, national constitutions, and national laws. And so it's very significant basis for the whole discussion of human rights law in the past 72 years. There were deep religious roots in the signatories, and that would be true as well in the 192 signatories of today. Originally, from the beginning, Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, and interestingly enough, in addition to different religious faiths signing on to this document, or most of it, also communist and atheistic states as well have signed on to this document. I find the language of this document something that we talked about in class. The language of the document's very much rooted in the concept of natural law, And these are the laws and principles that are agreed upon by people from many diverse cultures and societies. And natural law, in many ways, became a lot clearer on the question of human rights after, for instance, the Holocaust. I do want to mention a person who was influential in this document, but also in the entire 20th century, Jacques Maritain. I hope I said his name correctly. I believe him to be one of the not greatest Catholic philosophers of the 20th century. I think he may well have been one of the most significant intellectuals of the 20th century. He contributed to this document as well. Part of what he contributes is Jacques Maritain very famously represented natural law as it was understood by Thomas Aquinas. But Maritain also understood clearly that that language had to be expressed as well in theological and in biblical terms. And he even embraces the concept that we talked about in class that came out of some of our reading, and that is the concept of connaturality. And Maritain embraces that, and that's very helpful. My understanding of the way this term is used is that what we get in the Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what we get in there partially is not just natural law, but what our professor referred to as graced natural law. And that is law that is informed by the truth of God and the experience of faith. The language of this document provides space for people of faith and other people who do not embrace faith, but they have a compassionate vision of human society. And I see this document as a starting point for a conversation, for instance, in which the church would be quite welcome at that table. And there's a lot of terms that we can use, and we have slightly different understandings about those terms, but at the same time, the main meaning of those terms is probably something that we all embrace. Let me go through parts of the document with you. Let me start with the preamble. And as we're reading along, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. And that's a gorgeous opening statement, and it's something, quite frankly, that the church could have written itself. The concepts of inherent dignity, for instance, humans as created by God. And the inherent dignity is in the imago Dei, the fact that we share personhood with God, that we are meaningful, and that we are created by God, and that there is a human family. And that speaks to the issue of human solidarity, which is a fundamental concept of human rights. And then to call for three things: freedom, justice, and peace. And I refer to that as the way God intended for nations to live. And further down in the preamble, I remind you that we have the freedom of speech, the freedom of belief, the freedom from fear, and the freedom from want. And that was a brilliant formula that was laid down by FDR at the beginning of World War II, and in anticipation of World War II during the Great Depression. I mention it because it's interesting, probably, that Eleanor's husband's words would find its way prominently into this document. But FDR's formulation is significant in its own right, because FDR's formulation also became the basis for the Allies' declaration of the purpose of war in World War II. And so FDR's words rang out that there should be a rule of law as opposed to, and this is one of the first formal uses of this term, but it's now, of course, a substantial concept inside of human rights law and human rights philosophy. The rule of law, but the rule of law is in contrast to dictators, to evil states, and to anyone like the Nazis. The rule of law should be the first line of defense against people who would perpetrate evil in any society. They use the phrase in the preamble, faith in fundamental human rights, and again, in the dignity and worth of the human person. And I think even the use of the word person here is important because it focuses on the personhood of humanities. And in terms of creation, it focuses on the personhood of God himself. And we also get a declaration in the preamble of equal rights for men and women. And as a matter of rights is concerned, not necessarily a question of a matter of roles, but as a matter of rights, all humans, men and women, any human, has the dignity that is imparted to them because they were created by God. In Article 1, all humans are born free and equal. And I would point out again, as God made them and as God intended. In Article 1, the odd phrase, spirit of brotherhood, and I think it refers to something that we've even talked about in Veritatis Splendor, and that is the importance of human compassion in human society, for instance. In Article 2, the protection of dignity, it is a protection from discrimination based on race, color, long list here, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. That discrimination. And discrimination, it really amounts to, and all forms of that amount to one thing, and that is a denial that a human is fully created in the image of God. Well, I got us down through article number 2 as an introduction to the document, and the rest of this class, with questions and comments from students, I would cover the entire document. See you folks in class.